As was said, I lead the talent.io engineering team, and I've been doing that for 6 years almost. I have built this team. I've been a developer for 10 years, and as a hiring manager, I've hired dozens of people and led hundreds of interviews. I learned a lot while doing that. And in this talk, I want to share the experience and the best practices I've acquired throughout this journey. So the best practices that I will talk about, I didn't come up with them myself. This is something that was greatly inspired by one book that is called Who, the Hey Method for Hiring by Geoff Smart. And there is a quote in that book that I like very much about hiring, which is, who is where the magic begins or where the problem starts. And I find this quote quite interesting because indeed when you hire the right person on your team, it feels like everybody is winning time and feeling more productive. And on the other hand, when there is a mismatch in hiring, it can cause a lot of trouble, a lot of time lost, both for the company and for the person who gets hired not at a position fitting with their skills or with what they want to do. So now, the next question, before I go deep into the talk, is as a developer, why is hiring interesting to me? So before answering that question, let me ask you one question or a couple of questions. So can you show your hand if you ever participated to hiring developers? All right. Some of you maybe have defined hiring processes for developer in their team. Can you raise your hand if that's the case? All right. Then maybe more people will answer that question. Who already passed interviews as a developer? All right. So if you haven't raised your hand, I guess you're curious about the talk. So maybe you can raise your hand if you are. Yes. Thank you. All right. So if you raise your hand, basically, I hope this talk will bring something to you. So now, back to the question, why is hiring interesting to you? So the first thing is, as developers and as tech people, interviewing is not something we do very often. So if you change jobs every couple of years, maybe you will have 5 to 10 hiring processes. So this is something that is quite hard to master by experience. So I would say that in this talk, I hope by giving you a perspective on how to define those processes, that as a developer, it will better prepare you for the interview and make you more successful. The second reason is that I think as a development aspect, this is something I encourage developers to do a lot in my teams, to start participating to hiring process, because this is about developing a new set of skills and really also caring about your own well-being, because you get to choose your next teammates. So you want to make sure that the people you work with are people that you are comfortable working with. And the last thing is that as tech people, it could be that at some point you are going in the seat of the person in charge of designing the hiring processes. And in that case, it's good to have a knowledge of what's the dynamics. And this is what I hope to provide you with in this talk. All right. Now, if we talk about hiring in general and hiring processes, so basically you have a recruiter on one end of the table who will try to evaluate the person in front of them, and then a developer will have to demonstrate their skills. So this is one way of looking at hiring processes, but I think the opposite is also true. When you come to an interview as a developer, it's important also to evaluate the opportunity, to evaluate which questions you are asked and what values you can see from the way you are discussing with companies. And the same way as an interviewer, it's also important for you to show a great picture of who you are as a team, so that the candidates, they can make a better informed choice. So before I move to this, the hiring challenges, I will say that this talk will talk mostly about the perspective from a recruiter side, but there will be also some tips on the candidate side to make sure you can be more successful in your future interviews. Now, hiring comes with a lot of challenges, so I will cover some of them that I encountered myself when I began interviewing. The first one, I think, is a sense of responsibility. So as a hiring manager or just as an interviewer, you are here to kind of judge the person that is in front of you. So you need to be fair to them. So to really, and I think it's a very strong responsibility to say, okay, this person gets to have an opportunity or doesn't get to have this opportunity. I find that at the beginning it can be quite challenging when you begin interviewing. And the second aspect is that you also need to be responsible towards your team to make sure that the evaluation you make is exactly fitting the opportunity that you want to fill. So that's one of the challenging in hiring. Another challenge, which is really important, is that you have a limited context. So basically, you only get to evaluate the side of the candidate that you probed yourself and that they deliberately show to you. So if you don't ask the right questions and you don't dive into the answers and go deeper, it could be that the picture that you have of the candidate is not really accurate and is not exactly matching what you would like to evaluate for those candidates. So I find this is also a challenge that is quite interesting. And the last one, so that's quite common. So in hiring, unconscious biases are very prevalent. So I listed two biases that I think are very important and that needs to be avoided while hiring. So having biases is human. So this is part of being a human condition, a human being, and this is something that is helpful most of the times. But in hiring, that's not, you have to be mindful about those. So the first one is affinity bias, which is the tendency to try to hire somebody who looks like you. So on paper, it looks like a great idea because you are in the company, you are hiring, so you must be successful probably. So it's likely that people who are like you are also going to be successful. The danger with that is that actually what makes you successful at the company is a very limited set of your characteristics. And by trying to look for people who look like you, it could be that you will put a lot of weight on characteristics that are irrelevant to your job. The second aspect is also that diverse teams are well known to solve problems much better than teams composed of people with similar backgrounds. So it's always good to optimize for diversity. And in order to do that, it means that you need to identify exactly what you want to look for in the people you interview. The second bias, which I think is also quite important, is the confirmation bias. So as humans, we are very good at making first impression on people. And what can happen during an interview is that you meet somebody, in the first 2 minutes you've made an opinion on them, and then you will spend the rest of the interview trying to confirm your first opinion. So this is something you need to be aware of in order to be able to take a step back, and there are tools that can help you with fighting against those biases. So there are many more biases. I could do a full talk about those, so I won't dive deeper into those. Now let's talk about what's the recipe to create what I call a delightful hiring process. So the first thing that can seem obvious but is really often overlooked is to define the needs. And there are some tools like scorecards where you just first say, okay, who do I need to hire? Which means what are the missions that I need to that this person will need to fulfill in order to be successful with those missions. What are the skills that I want to test during the interview process? So by having a scorecard, this is a way to avoid biases, because then all the debriefs that you will do after interviewing, you can say, okay, everything that is not on the scorecard, I won't evaluate that because that's probably not relevant. So is the person fun or not fun? That's not really something you're looking for. So let's ignore that in the debriefs. So once you have defined your goals and your mission and the skills you want to evaluate, you will design a process. So it's important that at each step of the process, you try to assess a specific set of skills that were defined in your scorecard. And then I would say that what you should do also is aim for a very short process, because it will make you more competitive. Because if several people are interviewing with the candidate that you have in front of you, it could be that they will be faster, they will make an offer faster, and then the candidate that was great for you will actually go to another team without having the opportunity to choose with what you had to offer. So aim for a short process, and it will also make it more efficient internally. You will lose less time. And the last ingredient that I think is quite important to design a delightful process is to train the team. Again, that can seem quite obvious, but this is sometimes overlooked. I know that the first time I got into interviewing, I was thrown into an interview room with the candidates, and I had witnessed other interviews, but it was not a proper training. Especially, I was not trained about unconscious biases, and this is something that really you need to know about them in order to avoid them. So that's quite easy to do, but quite easy to overlook, and important to do that. And also, you want to align on the same objectives. Make sure that your teams has the same objectives that you have defined in the scorecard. Now, I will talk about a typical hiring process. So I would put big quotes around the word typical, because I think there are as many processes as there are company. But I will try to outline quickly what it can look like. So first of all, usually you have a screening call, which is really 45 minutes or 30 minutes, where you want to decide whether it's worth continuing with the candidate, and same thing for the candidate, whether they want to go forward with the opportunity. Then you have homework and live coding session, which are more about evaluating the dev-related skills of the developers. I have something called the manager interview, which I would say tends to evaluate skills that are not related to dev, but that are relevant for a dev position. And then there are everything that is about soft skills and cultural fit with the company, which usually is more done through the HR interview and the reference checking that I will dive deeper on. So let's get started with zooming in on the screening. Yes, on the screening call. So this is really the goal of this call is really simple. It's just in 30 minutes. That's a yes or no decision. Do we continue with the candidate, and does the candidate want to continue with us? What I would say is that you need, as a recruiter, to fish for, and as a candidate as well, to fish for obvious deal breakers in order to save time and to not go into a process where you know that something that was quite basic will not match. So I'm talking about like basic qualifications. I'm talking about salary, for instance. So it could be that the salary range that you can offer as a recruiter does not match the salary expectation of the candidate. So it's better to talk about this right away, because this is very simple to evaluate that. And it works both ways. So it means also, as a candidate, you should ask all the questions that you have in order to make sure that the opportunity that you have in front of you covers all you need. In terms of tips that I would give for the recruiting teams, I would say it's very important to have a developer from the team run it. Most of the time, well, often, I would say it's somebody from the HR team that would do the first screening call. And I think this is, even though the HR people can be trained and can be briefed on what the job is about, I think it's always more relevant to have somebody who actually does the job in order to answer all the questions the developer may have or the tech person may have about the team, whether it's about certain types of processes. So if they want to dive on certain questions, it's more natural. So we have very good feedback from developers who met the developer from our team as a first screening call. That's a really great experience for them. Also, another advice would be to keep it quick. I know that's something I had a lot of troubles with at the beginning of my interviewing sessions. I tend to talk a lot and to be quite curious, so I would dive into the candidate's resume. But that's actually something I do also at a later stage. So in the end, I would spend 1 hour or 1 hour and 15 minutes doing that. And actually in 30 minutes, you can make a decision about the basic. So really try to keep it quick and make the person in front of you comfortable to say, okay, we won't dive into your resume today. We will do that in a later stage if we see that there is a mutual interest. Also, something that we would recommend is to use video calls. I think it makes it helps with building a connection between the company and the candidate. The second, what I would say for candidates, so we talked about unconscious biases earlier on, and I think there is a tip that is quite important. So as a candidate, you can also use confirmation bias to your advantage. So the screening call is like your first point of contact with the company. So you really want to appear positive, enthusiastic, curious. That's really important because it will start building in the head of the person in front of you that you are a quite enthusiastic person and that they want to work with you, basically. All right, so that was about the screening call. So now I have a deep session about homework assignments, and I have another survey for you. So who has ever had to do a coding exercise at home during a process? So yeah, a lot of people. And second question, who has ever given up on an assignment they were given at home? So one, yeah, a lot of people. I would say I will raise my hand as well. It happened to me as well. And I think this is a little bit of a controversial step in hiring processes. And sometimes for good reasons. So while researching this talk, I went to the web and I looked at a CSS developer blog that wrote a full article about the uselessness of the coding challenge and why they would never advocate using this assess prospective candidates. And when I read the article, there were a couple of points I disagreed with. But a couple of points that were very relevant, and especially the main argument is that if the homework assignment is too long, like it's asking as a first step for a very big commitment, especially if in the end you will end up saying no to the candidate, sorry, the work was subpar. So I think this is something that contributes to the bad reputation of a homework assignment, is that few people want to spend their weekend working on an assignment. So I would say don't give long assignments to candidates. And if you must do a very long assignment, I think there are two things you can do. So the first one is, regardless of the outcome, schedule a session of debrief with the candidate to say if they failed, why they failed, and dive with a presentation on their work with them. And the second one is to like if you ask somebody to work for 2 days, maybe you can offer to compensate them for their work. And yes, and long homework assignments also, that's bad for competition, because while your candidate is doing your very long assignment, it means that maybe they moved faster on other processes, which can make you miss great opportunities. And also devs are known to be good devs are known to be lazy, like they don't want to repeat work. So that's also something that you could be missing out on. So now, how to design a great homework assignment. So I think you should focus on what is the objective. And to me, the objective is actually to allow the developers to showcase their skills in a familiar environment. So they can work on their computer, ideally on a language that they already know, unless that's a requirement of the job position. And really, this is for developers, this is the best test to showcase your skills, because you don't have the pressure of live coding session where you have to a limited amount of time and you don't really know the tools or the person in front of you. So really, that's important. Now, as a recruiter, I think you should design your homework exercise and be very specific on what you want to assess. I would recommend coming up with your own exercises and your own, that matches obviously the skills that you want to assess. And obviously, I already said that, be reasonable about the time investment. I think aiming for 1 or 2 hours max is great. But in order to do that, you also need to ask for feedback from your candidates, because it turns out that I realized a couple of months ago that most candidates spent 4 to 5 hours on the test we were sending to them. So I said, okay, maybe we are enthusiastic because we know the exercise, so we say, okay, maybe this one will take 30 minutes and this other one 30 minutes. But in practice, it's not often the case. So you just need to ask feedback from your candidates about how long it took to do the test and adjust your test accordingly. Now I have one tip for candidates, is to be upfront about your time commitment, because conversely, you may not want to miss an opportunity with a company just because you don't have time for the test. And it turns out that at Talent, we already hired somebody who skipped the homework assignment because she was upfront about this, and we said, okay, we had a good feeling on the screening call with her, so let's go directly to the live coding interview. And it turned out to be a very good decision, because in the end it ended up in a match. So yeah. Be upfront as a candidate, and as a company, I would say be flexible, because you don't want to miss on opportunities like this. So I've talked about one way of designing homework assignments. There are a couple of alternatives that I don't use personally, but could be viable alternatives. The first one are online tests. So the thing I don't like about online tests is that it adds back a notion of pressure, because you have the time pressure usually when you do that online. So it could be that you fail the test just because you had your brain was missing for 30 minutes and then it's too late. So as a company, I would say, don't rely too much on automated score, and just try to look at the code, because sometimes you might see things that are really interesting even though the score was low. The second thing that I've seen done are code reviews, which I think has the great advantage, like online tests, to be relatively short to do. I think it's not really relevant for juniors, because typically junior developers don't have a lot of practice doing code reviews, so it might be more difficult for them to come through with that, but that could be a viable alternative. And the last one is providing a code sample, which I think is a little bit unfair, because depending on the person, the code samples that you will get are very different from one another. So it's difficult to be fair while comparing both code samples from two different developers. So it's not universal enough, in my opinion. However, it's a minimal time investment from a developer's perspective. And one quick tip about the homework. We talked about the homework assignment. I think as developers, don't hesitate to put your homework assignment on GitHub, so that it can provide then code samples for companies that might be asking for it. Now comes the live coding part, which I think is the scariest part of an interview, because usually you will meet someone for the first time. They will evaluate your work. Maybe you will not. It will not be done on your computer. It could be like a whiteboard interview or something that you're not really used to do. So it can put a lot of stress to developer, and rightfully so. And here, I think one of the key goal is to make sure that when you are assessing developer, you are assessing their capacity to work and not their capacity to interview. So for instance, I don't recommend whiteboard interview where you would ask about a problem on the whiteboard and then ask them to solve it on the whiteboard, because simply today developers, they have access to internet, they have set up their own environments. So when they are working, they have set something that they are comfortable with, and you want to evaluate them in this setting. When they have everything they need, can they go through your coding exercises? So on the other hand, some people like to work on whiteboard and to solve first a problem on the whiteboard and then put it on their write a program and on their computer. So you should also provide ways for these types of developer to have access to a whiteboard or to notes. Just really the main goal here is to make the candidate comfortable so that you are the closest possible to evaluating their actual working skills. So it could be also, so now another way to make the candidate comfortable is to, as an interviewer, is to remove the interviewer hat and put on a pair programmer hat and have kind of a more balanced roles between the interviewer and the interviewee. I think this is something that really, obviously there is always it cannot work 100%, but I think it will make the candidate more confident and just think that your goal as an interviewer is to go through the exercise whatever the way. So even if you have to help a lot the person you're working with, at least even if it doesn't work out, they will have had a good experience, hopefully, and learn things, which I think is important. And also what you can do when you can afford that is let the candidate choose the language that they want to use their own machine, because this way you remove the awkwardness of showing up to an interview. And now, as a candidate, so this is something I've seen a lot of times, it's very important to communicate your thought process. Because sometimes maybe you haven't understood properly what the exercise was about. So rephrasing the exercise and making sure you have understood everything is key. And also, sometimes, most of the times, if you say, okay, I'm stuck on something, I know that there is something very silly I need to do, but I can't figure it out, you can get some hints from the interviewer, assuming the interviewer is also here to help you go through with the exercise. So really that's important, because if you don't communicate, there is no way for an interviewer to know what your thought process is, and this is typically what they evaluate, how you go about a problem. And sometimes how the solution is not really what you want to see. All right, now let's go to another stage of interviews, which is the manager interview. So sometimes manager interview and live coding interviews are merged. So here, for the sake of this presentation, I'm just separating both of them. And the goal of the manager interview is to assess all the skills that are required for the job, but that are not related to coding. And so to get the most of value out of it as an interviewer, I think the best way to proceed is to ask non-obvious business cases, because the typical HR question that you can see and look up on the web, I think it's harder to evaluate somebody. So for instance, one question that you may ask is, okay, so you have to develop a new feature on a repository whose maintainer has left 3 months ago. How do you go about it? And then you let the candidate talk, and you dive deeper, you ask questions, and the goal really here is to evaluate how the candidate goes about thinking, and what are the typical reflexes. And then for candidates, I would say that an important aspect is that you're interviewing with your future manager. So he's the one who will have all the answers to your questions. So if you have any doubts about the position, just ask them now. That's very important. I won't go through the HR interview, because that's not an interview I'm typically doing. But maybe one quick advice before I move on to the reference check is to say, don't overlook it as a developer, because more and more, and I think that's a good thing, teams are looking for people with great soft skills and that will fit into the team's culture. So this is really important not to overlook it. Now about reference checks. So the thing is that interviews are not foolproof. As I said, you will only get to see one side of the candidates, which is the one that you ask questions about. And often, talking to former managers who worked with the candidate will allow you to have a very different perspective on this person. Obviously, this is not something you should do systematically. Because, for instance, for junior developers, it doesn't really make sense to ask for a reference. So you could ask their internship tutor, but usually I think you don't get as much value. There are other things you want to evaluate too for junior developers. But for more senior developers, I think it allows to have a different perspective, to lift any remaining doubts. So maybe there was something in the interview process you're not quite sure about. You may want to ask questions around this. And also one of the goals would be to say, how can I make this person successful if he joins the company? Now, how to run it? So obviously, as a hiring manager, you will ask references from your candidates, so they have been vetted, and they will probably say good things about the candidates. That's totally to be expected, and that's totally fine. You should let the reference say great thing about the candidate. Now, how you can get value out of it, I think it's by diving into examples, because examples are really where you can. It's difficult to lie about something that is factual. If I ask, is this person great? It's easy to say yes, she's great. But if you ask, okay, can you tell me of a time when she did this and that? Then you have to be specific, and it's difficult to come up with something completely not in the reality. So one thing that you can do in order to get some examples is to say, okay, I have a set of skills that I want you to classify. To say which ones are the more relevant for the person and which ones are the least relevant. Then you can challenge the ranking that is provided by your reference, and just ask for examples, and then, like you should do in most interviews, dive deeper and ask questions. All right, there is one last step I want to talk about before the conclusion, which is something that is often overlooked also by companies, which is rejection call. So sometimes, and sometimes it's very often, it will not work out with the candidates that you have interviewed. But I think it's really important to optimize for a candidate experience throughout the journey. So even though it ends up not being a match between the company and your opportunity and the person, I think it's very important to ensure a good experience despite rejecting them. So I would say that you should most of the time call the candidate. So where I would draw the line, I would say after a screening call, it's okay if you just send an email to explain why you don't want to move forward with them. However, from the time they started investing, sometimes in your live coding, your homework exercise or your live coding interviews, so they invested hours into your process, I think it's important to take the time to propose a call with them to just debrief about the interview process and let them know, because you can maybe teach them how to perform better in other interviews. So that's really important. And the candidates that you will see, maybe they will be your future users or your future clients. Maybe a future employees, because maybe it didn't work out today, but maybe 2 years from now they will have acquired the skills that they were missing, and yeah, it could be also future partners where you would build a project together. So now, how to run a rejection call? It's not easy because obviously the person is often disappointed when it ends up with a rejection. So be empathetic. You can expect that they are going to be disappointed, and you need to acknowledge that that's totally acceptable. I think also you can let them provide feedback about your process so that it evens the scales. Highlight the good and the bad. So talk about the great thing you find about them, but also about the thing why you didn't choose to hire them. I would say there is a nuance to be made about soft skills, because it's quite hard to be factual about soft skills. So you can mention that, but I won't dive deeper and make absolute evaluation. Just remind them that it's the context of interview, and it could be that it's not the right assessment, but this is what you got. Now I have very important tips for candidates is to be open to feedback. So obviously, it's disappointed to be rejected, it feels bad. However, this is how you can grow and become a better interviewee, and it can help you score your future jobs. So just be open to feedback. And actually, it also happens that you might end up changing the mind of the recruiters. So it happened to me to say no to a candidate and then to have a great conversation with them on the phone and reconsider and actually extend an offer. This is something that happened to me because there are sometimes it's really a thin line between go or no go, and you just need more context and specifically some soft skills you can evaluate a lot when you provide feedback such as this. And well, typically the capacity to be open to feedback and the listening skills, this is like a key exercise to do. So I don't recommend to run a mock rejection call just to test for the capacity to receive feedback. But I think this is something that is quite true. All right, so that's it for the talk today. So thank you for being there. I think designing a delightful hiring process requires tailoring it to your team composition, your objectives, your onboarding process quality. So be mindful about defining your goals, ensuring your process match your goal, and iterating about this. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Benjamin.